Hello, everyone. Leah Wilson, Executive Director of Stand for Health Freedom, a grassroots advocacy center and the voice for the silent majority. I'm here today with Alison McDowell, mom and independent researcher, and she's going to talk with us about one of the most, if not, I would venture to say, the most important issue that we are facing today, and that is vaccine passports or programs that look like vaccine passport programs. So thanks for joining us today. And thank you so much, Alison, for taking time to share with us about everything that you've learned over the past several years in regards to these types of programs.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me to speak to your audience. Can I just say a little bit about my background that's a little bit different from folks? Would that work?
That would be great. Please
Okay,
share.
so I'm based in Philadelphia, and I kind of came into these issues not from the health perspective side. So I think that's a framing that is useful for people to know. Really, the learning curve over the past, year plus has really steeped me in understanding the health aspect and the wellness aspect. But that was not my primary focus. I actually have been working pretty closely on following money and power around schools and public education and the use of data and predictive profiling and data analytics within an educational setting. But what I've come to realize over the past, since a year ago, March, is that the same playbook is underway in the management of not only of people's cognitive and their mental ways of thinking about the world through the education system, but also their physical bodies and also their mental, health as well. So it's the control mechanism that I learned in school, in as it pertained to school settings. I'm sort of lifting that and applying it to managing people within sort of a medical I call it like a biosecurity state, like medical policing state scenario. And it's very similar. So that's how my lens is a little bit different from probably a lot of people who've their focus is coming from a long-standing position within the health and health freedom community.
That's super helpful. And it's good to know that you've been researching the power structures for a while. Not all of us have been immersed in that world. And so being able to learn from you is extremely helpful. Let's start by hearing what your biggest concerns are with the vaccine passport type programs. Some people might say, well, it's just a necessity. I have to be able to travel for work, or I have to be able to see my mom who lives in a nursing home. And they fail to recognize that standing up matters in this situation. So what would you say are your top concerns about A, the infrastructure being built for vaccine passport type programs, and B, people participating in those programs?
Okay, so there's a couple of key elements to this that I'd like to state first. What we're in now is about social control mechanisms, right? So controlling people's mobility, controlling people's access to school, employment, family members, that sort of thing. But it's about more than simply controlling that level of access. And what is going to be coming on the heels of what we've heard talked about, the fourth industrial revolution, or this great reset, which means very, very powerful interests, many of them with ties to defense contracting and debt finance industries. And these are global companies. This is affecting the whole world. Are imagining a world of the future of work. You might hear that, oh, the future of work, where a lot of that is going to be automated. And then there will be many, many people dispossessed of everything that they knew, both economically speaking, their careers, things that bring them satisfaction. And they know that that would cause tremendous unrest. And so the health structure, this health scenario of the past year, is creating a justification to both assign people a unique identifier number. So that would be not unlike a barcode on an item you would buy at a grocery store or an RFID chip, to track and control people and to be able to do that at a very granular level. So there's the control mechanism. But what would these powerful interests, both in technology and finance and defense contracting and pharmaceuticals, do with all the leftover people if they are successful, and I hope they're not, but if their vision comes to fruition, right, that we're going to have mostly factories run by robots or automation algorithms, what do we do with all of these people, besides keeping them from, overthrowing you, because they'd really actually like to have their child to have a human teacher or a human, doctor or nurse, or, a human taking care of their elderly parent in assisted care. They have the control mechanism, but then they're actually going to find a way to commodify people and bet on their lives to keep them busy so that they can't organize and create a different outcome. And that's what most people are not quite understanding. They understand the mobility control element, and I think they understand the rights and privileges element, and that's something that's come through very clearly with the Green Pass in Israel and the pass in the EU. And daily pass in Los Angeles and Excelsior, the pass systems, they understand the control. They do not understand the way in which it's tied to financial markets. And that's the way in which the health access system is going to interface with many other social welfare benefits. Okay, and so that would be, you've been put out of work because of lockdowns or because your job has gone away, they've automated it. Maybe you will get a universal basic income, right? A chunk of money, not very much money really, to try to scrape by, but it will be conditional on if anyone has spent time in the welfare system. There are all sorts of rules. It's almost a full-time job just to navigate all the rules of the welfare state, the bureaucracy. So in order to access affordable housing, a food subsidy, education, you're going to be expected to jump through these hoops. And that will be part of your unique identifier. It will not simply be, here you need to be able to demonstrate you're in medical compliance. That's it. No, it's once you have the unique identifier tied to the medical compliance, then that they will link it over. And we've seen, I think in The Economist, they just issued, the cover story was GovCoin, right? It will not simply ever just stop with your managing your body and managing your health, in air quotes. It will be about managing your access to training, managing your access to food, to housing, to many other situations. And it will all be about essentially predictably profiling you all the time and then monitoring your compliance. And in this way, it's connected to another part of the fourth industrial revolution, which is the rise of smart cities. Philadelphia is a smart city. Indianapolis is a smart city. Many of these are smart cities with sensors that will be your minders. And right now it's your phone would be your minder. And we've seen that with the QR codes and the contact tracing, and these passport systems might live on your phone. But eventually the goal is to have biosensors that will transmit data in real time through these smart technologies and decide how you live in the world. So what the piece I bring, I think a lot of people have a good handle on the concerns around the mobility, but my piece is to say, that's the toe in the door. The toe in the door is to use the threat of state security or national security threat, unless you can, demonstrate that you've followed the medical, prescribed protocols, many of which are funded by the same players that are going to benefit from keeping you contained on the blockchain. You have to have all of these other things. And I'm someone in my 50s. So, they don't care about us so much. What they really want is the children, because the world that they're building is that they want to capture the minds and the bodies of the youth, so that for them in the next 20, 30, 40 years, the future that Davos has imagined, which to me seems almost incomprehensible, will be accepted by them, that they will accept and perhaps embrace all of these limitations. And, so that's sort of the struggle that we're in right now.
So you talk about a future that Davos has imagined. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, when I started out fighting school closures and standardized test scores, which is where I sort of was in 2013, I never imagined that I would have to ultimately pivot into transhumanism, which sounds kind of crazy. Or I would encourage people just to before you had mentioned, do I have any particular credentials? And I don't. My background is art history and historic preservation, and I do research, and then I think about things. So when I was doing this research, I'm finding documents like the Japan's moonshot project, and it's issued by the Japan Science and Technology Agency, which is the government of Japan. And that's backed by SoftBank, which is very a major financial institution that's running the world's largest AI and robotics innovation fund. and Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, which is doing 6G technology, which is like the next phase after 5G that more people are aware of, which is robot to robot communication, right? So you don't just like sort of blow it off like, oh, that's probably crazy, when Japan says by 2050, they're imagining we will exist without a physical mind and body in time and space. Which sounds kind of crazy, right? Like, who would even think that that was an aspirational goal, that we would want to live in a globalized world where we, as a cartoon character, we live online and we pop over and do some work in Brazil for the afternoon, and then we go over to, you know, Oakland, have coffee with our digital friend in a digital room. But we can see how even within Facebook, in these rooms, in these virtual spaces, and this kind of interaction is conditioning us to what's called like telepresence labor, or to really be physically confined in a small geographic area and then live, if you can call that living, through virtualized presence, whether that's actual video or whether it's, you know, they really want to reduce you to an avatar, to a cartoon character. And then you could actually have split personalities. You can have like multiples of you living in other places. So this is this kind of crazy future that they're imagining. Both, to me, key documents are this Japanese moonshot project, the goal number 1, and they call it cyborg avatar capitalism. And the second piece is something called the Internet of Bio-Nano Things. So just like put that in your search bar, the Internet of Bio-Nano Things. And this is work that's been done for several decades. And nobody knows about it because the media isn't going to tell you about it. You're not supposed to know until it's too late. And again, maybe they cannot accomplish these imaginings that they have in their mind. But a couple years ago, I was reading, doing some research, and I came across the Internet of Humans. It was the first time I'd seen the Internet of Human. Roberto Viola with the EU, he's like the telecom guy of the EU, and he's talking about, this is great, we're going to have the Internet of Humans. And I'm like, well, you know, I do like the internet, but I've never really considered myself as being meshed into the internet. And then it went to the Internet of Bodies, which is something you hear often now within the context of the Great Reset. And then the Internet of Bio-Nano Things, which is essentially imagining our consciousness just virtualized and the physical world just virtualized as little atoms floating around, and you just think things, and your telepathic thoughts, you know, make things happen. But it's all within a militarized construct. And a lot of this is based on biosensors, like essentially scientists looking at bodies. And this is not just humans, this is any living beings, really, looking at cells as turning them into computers, turning them into, looking at them like they're electrical engineering things, programmable matter. They almost like it's just a thing that you could program if you just had the right tools. And so we are embarking on this software of life, you know, these discussions in which no one's really saying, by the way, how do you feel about this future, folks? Do you want to be virtualized and turn your body into a, you know, a biocomputer? Or would you like to maybe, you know, we're storing DNA, data in synthetic DNA right now. Like, hey, maybe we can come up with a way to store our data in your body. You know, maybe we can resonate with you. You know, does this sound good? And then maybe, oh, you don't like that? Well, then we'll stop. Like, that isn't the conversation that's being had, because in some ways, the people that I've come across who are supposedly the medical ethicists are the most unethical people. And so everything is rushing forward on the heels of really intense developments in nanotechnology and biocomputing, not just for people who might have a very serious illness at risk of death that they need to try an experimental procedure and that they have informed consent. No, this train is leaving the station. And in many respects, I think that the digital identity, I don't like to call it like use the V word, like for the passport, because I think ultimately their goal is to have these biosensors, and that it isn't actually going to be that in the end, that we will be subjected in various ways to gene therapies that may not be fully, that we're fully in agreement with at a population level bioengineering program. And the engineering that will take place will be so complex that they will track it on your electronic health record. And that came with the Affordable Care Act. And Zeke Emanuel helped usher that in, the shift to digital health records. And for the most part, no one would think twice about a digital health record, like, oh, that seems super convenient. But if you understand that their goal is towards a transhumanist future of slowly genetically modifying whole populations, they need a really good record keeping system. And who knows if the system will actually work. But these electronic health records are, in my opinion, going to be used to track the gene therapies across time and across individuals.
So to track the software updates in humans.
Yes, and who got what?
And right? So transhumanism basically means removing the human elements from life, removing the necessity for, tell me more about what transhumanism means.
Well, going way back, I mean, at least into the like 30s and 40s, like with the Macy conferences, there's this idea of cybernetics. And a lot of the cybernetic work was melding people and machines. And so much of the technology having to do with that work actually came through the Air Force, because if you can imagine a pilot in a cockpit, like their goal was to create you as one with the machine that you were using, which was your plane, right? And often using this plane as a weapon, right? A weapon system. And so it was this unification of how do they design and construct so that you meld with the machine, right? But in that respect, you know, you could still climb out of the plane at the end, right? Like you might have this seamless experience for a time, but you got to climb out of the plane. And then many of these technologies are also framed as dual use. So they'll pick things that like, how could you be against this? Like very sophisticated prosthetic devices, right? Like sophisticated, you know, if someone loses a limb, you know, and then you have these, you know, extensions, right? You have pacemakers, you have these various medical devices that are enmeshed in your body that nobody would say, well, I think that's a problem. I would prefer someone not have their life shortened and not have a pacemaker. How could you be concerned about that? But much of this R&D is military in nature. And then the shift is also to melding your mind with the machine, because that is what the Internet of Bio-Nano thinks, is that your thoughts, and we've heard this in some of the Great Reset videos, they'll say like, oh, we'll know your thoughts. And so that the electrical signals of your brain function will be projected into space, that your mind might not even be your own at that point. If the biocomputing is into your cells and into your genetic material, again, down the road, which is how they talk about it, do you still have any autonomy over being in the world? And again, knowing that it's not simply humans, it's all of the beings and our responsibility. Because in one of my talks, I talked about the bees, you know, because the bees are sort of central to the whole agricultural, right, and pollination, and that we're part of this web of life on this planet that we share. And the 5G, the EMF are killing the bees, you know, many other, you know, toxins are killing the bee populations. And so they're already developing robot bees. They're saying, oh, we're going to have robot bees. And they said, well, we could use CRISPR technology, which is gene editing technology. Maybe we could make the bees live in all the poison. Wouldn't that be a thing? We'll just re-engineer the bees so they can live in the toxic environment. And in my, you know, and this is something I've learned a lot over the past year from Sayer and Tom Cowan and others about terrain theory, is like we've always understood the issues with environmental contamination, but to me, it's just gotten much deeper, understanding the ways in which toxic environments create stress on people's bodily functions. And that being in Philadelphia, which is an urban environment, when the first refineries in the country, very heavy petrochemicals, they have no intention of actually cleaning the environment to make the world a better place for other living beings, those in power. They would rather keep contaminating the environment and then re-engineer us and make profit on re-engineering us to live in those toxins, like the bees. So when we speak, I'm trying to sort of speak both. I work in a garden. That's my other job when I'm not doing this, is that the decisions we make today about these interventions are for all of life on this planet, all of natural life that chooses to perhaps not be a cybernetic being with biocomputing.
So the choice to not be a cybernetic being depends on our choice not to get the barcode. I mean, is it that simple? Like if we don't, if we want to push back against losing what it means to be human, losing what it means to
Yes.
be connected and needed, um, then I guess that means we push back against relinquishing control of our body at the most basic levels.
Yeah. I mean, I think bodily autonomy is central. And again, I will say this is someone who was not fully familiar with all these issues really before the pandemic. You don't know until you know, and then you know better and you try to do better. So to me, the decisions we make are for um, ourselves, but then also potentially a lot of this is about control of the future of reproduction among natural life. And so these choices, I try to remind people it's for those not yet born. Because if the tipping point happens to the point that natural reproduction is no longer an option, then all of the generations that would come after us will not have a choice to make.
Hmm.
Um, and that feels pretty profound. I mean, I never thought that I would be living through this kind of moment. Um, but I think that is why it's important to stand. And I will also say in this moment too, I think there's something energetic about what's happening, and I won't claim to know all of these things either. When I first started, um, I wrote a few things early on last March and April, and the people with whom it resonated were holistic, like healers, um, musicians, people of faith, and artists. Like these, it was those people that connected, and I think it was this energetic sense. And I know that there's a lot of fear out there, and anger and frustration, even within the communities that are trying to present this alternative option. And I think as concerns about potential effects leaching out into people who haven't made a choice to have a medical intervention, there's a lot of fear there. And I would say to face this idea of putting us in a planetary computer, which is this goal, is to barcode us, put us in their planetary computer initially for to manage our bodies and our minds as part of social impact finance deals, which I can talk about a little bit more later, and do this transhumanism stuff, but also to manage like almost our energy inputs and outputs, like as a computing element, as a node of computing in the world that they just turned into a machine. We actually have to stand together. And so what I'm trying to sort of say is like, how do we figure out how to, like, I'm not writing anybody off at this point, like for the most part. There's some people that would have a hard time coming back in, but like, I think this idea that there's some hard break in inclusionary versus exclusionary, my feeling from my heart is that we need to find ways of bridging and creating entry points, which if we talk about it as a planetary computer system and people's control that goes much broader and bring in the children and the other beings, it decenters the central issue, the immediate health issue that I think is so polarizing and is going to be hard to overcome, and provides people another frame of reference to come together. And even energetically, I think that even people who may have made a choice that wouldn't be the choice that you or I would make can still, they're not lost. I don't feel in my heart that that's something that's a one-off and that those people are just lost. I don't feel that that's true. And I think we should be very cautious about how we speak about it, because they want us fractured so that we cannot come together. And anyway, that's just kind of how I'm feeling about it at the moment.
Yes, I mean, you're right on. It's like, what is the new system that we are building? What are we passionate about? And that is human thriving,
Yes.
and it becomes the opposite, human thriving, educating our children in a quality manner so they're thinking, thriving, successful human beings is very different than programming our children for profit.
Wow.
Is what I think I hear you saying. And so it's, which world do we want to be a part of? And it seems like most global issues, to stand in a manner that allows us to have a new system, a different system than the global issue at hand, it comes down to daily decisions, right? It comes down to how do we interact with others? How do we engage in civic duty? And, that's where Stand for Health Freedom really comes in, is we truly believe that it still makes a difference whether we unite on certain issues to show exactly how many people care about our children's futures and about our ability to say how we conduct our lives and where we go and how we move, etc. And what I hear you talking about, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. My head is still reeling to an extent. And it almost sounds like when we were kids, when we played the game Sims, that we will actually be a Sim. So would we be the Sim in the Sims game and the driver of the Sim, or would someone else be driving us? Like, what does that look like?
Well, so gamification is a huge piece of all of this. And you had mentioned being in Indianapolis. So even though it's also Eli Lilly, I was focused on Indianapolis because of the Lumina Foundation. And the Lumina Foundation, their focus is on managing human capital. So the other key piece beyond transhumanism, which is the gene therapies, and I will say my friend, who's a teacher, Michael Kane, recommended a book to me called, I think it is One Perfect Day from the 1970s, Ira Levin, who was like wrote Rosemary's Baby and Boys from Brazil and other things. Very compelling book about compulsory gene therapies and injections and a technocratic controls planetary system from the 70s. It's a very compelling book, and I would recommend people look into that, because there is a lot. They have been, like, the ideas of this technocratic control system have been around for a long time, the cybernetics, but that specifically has, and you can sense what it means. And this is actually even based on another book called We from the 20s by Yevgeny Zamyatin, which is, again, being a number, living as a number, having no agency, obeying the rules. And I think for people who might say, well, I'm a pretty straight shooter, like I don't get into a lot of trouble, like why should I mind that this thing would happen, is that ultimately these are systems of power and domination. And they can make arbitrary rules that might go against your fundamental values of who you are as a being. And they may not be logical, and they may not make sense. And so once you are put in a system that is almost like a digital panopticon, how do we navigate that, right? Because then we will be forced, they will know, and potentially even know your thoughts, right? Wrong think. When positions are asserted that just go against fundamentally your moral being, like every fiber of your moral being and consciousness or conscience, that's a real concern. And I think that's something that we've seen over the past year, is that rules change, they seem arbitrary, they seem to not necessarily make sense. If you question the rules, then there are draconian consequences. And so things, I had been looking into Bluffdale, which is a giant NSA data center in Salt Lake City, and it holds 100 years worth of data on every person. And they would say, oh, we'll never go into that data unless you come under, suspicion, and then we'll get a FISA order and court order and go in and pull your data, like your 100 years worth of data. And I thought, well, what happens if, you did something like gathering with a group of 20 people that would never 10 years ago have ever caused any concern for alarm, but your digital profile says you're a person who used to do things that are now considered illegal. Therefore you become suspect, even though it wasn't a problem when you did them, but now we have since seen that they're a problem. And for the most part, people are not imagining that their digital profiles, the data dust that they create in their online footprints, would be stored away, off a highway in Salt Lake City, Utah, but it is. And so we need to think about that, not only for ourselves, but our kids, because, most of their schools are running through Google Classroom right now. That granular level of data, this digital twinning is being built up as we speak. And then how is it going to be used? Do we think that they have our best interests at heart? I don't think so. So, but I got off track. I was supposed to talk about the gamification. Okay, the avatars. So digital twinning is a huge piece of this. If you look up Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, the 6G, they have a whole paper on digital twinning. there's something called Ready Player Me. Actually, the book Ready Player One is like that young adult book, and that guy was from Austin. You know, they want to live in the virtual world. You live in a devastated environment in like a tiny little metal stacked RV house, but then you go to school in the virtual world, and that is literally what they are planning. And people can go to my YouTube channel, Alison McDowell YouTube, and I have a 5-minute video on a program in Dallas where literally they're like, you go to school as an avatar, and it's a video game. They call it a hybrid model school. So this is, you know, bit by bit dribbling out.
So is the intention of that school to enrich the child's brain at all?
It's crazy because the child is actually tracked by a floating robot eye, the avatar. Like the avatar walks through the virtual game school world, like the Sims world, and there's this floating eyeball robot thing tracking them around. So it's to condition kids that you're under surveillance, that you're always being watched. And so these social impact investors, which are the Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, UBS Bank, the Vatican, SoftBank, all of these people are going to start placing bets on if you will behave in this new virtual world that they're building. And it's essentially what they're setting up is like, you won't get to do real work anymore. If you want to get a public benefit, if you want to be fed or have access to shelter, we are going to give you a checklist of all the things you have to do to self-improve, whether that's a wellness behavior, whether that's a mental health behavior, an addiction treatment behavior, a training behavior. You're going to have to check the boxes that you've walked your step count, that you've eaten your kale, that you've done your meditation, that you've learned your skills badges, that you've demonstrated a proper mindset, that you're gritty and resilient enough. And we will know because now we have wearable technology. We have Fitbit bands, and we have smart shoes and smart shirts and brainwave monitoring headbands. And we'll know if you did those, because that will automatically like check this online box if you are on your pathway. And then now the new prison will be run by the social workers and the educators and the healthcare professionals. Not that they want to, none of them would sign up for this job if they knew that this was the job, but this is what it's pivoting into. Who are the monitors? Did you do all of the things? Let me check the dashboard, right? And that's what telehealth is about. And that's what ed tech is about. And that, you know, that's coming if we don't refuse. And I would say if people understood that the future was your child being tracked by a robot eyeball as a cartoon character, everyone would say, no, thank you. Maybe I don't love all my teachers, but I still vastly prefer a human teacher that I can like argue my grade with rather than an algorithm and a robot, eyeball. But people can't even imagine that that's the future that people have in place. So the pathway program is part of it. The wearable technology is part of it. They're also needing to track people's skills in an online learning locker. So you'll never be done with school. You're always uploading skill points. AI will sort you for a task. You'll go onto an online platform and try to apply for work. Some of that work might be on a screen, but they increasingly have developed something called haptic robotics. So it's like the gaming consoles, like the hand controllers in the augmented reality, where you could sit in your closet, you'll probably have a tiny little room, and operate a factory piece of equipment halfway around the world. And you will be competing with people in 4 or 5 different countries for the lowest wage to do that work for like a week for a micro contract. And that's what the blockchain is for, is the blockchain system is to track your skills, track the global payments, track your impact. And again, can they get it all to work? Like Lumina is a key part of this, actually. Lumina is central on blockchain credentialing, the skills. It's all around the future of work with the Marco Foundation. And I'm trying to like reskill USA. It's all skill building because you'll never have a degree anymore. It's just the next demonstration of compliance. And we don't want that for our kids. And what I would say is like, I'm not a nationalist, but we need a global solidarity campaign, I say, of like scrappy moms against artificial intelligence, because we shouldn't have the kids in Indianapolis competing with the kids in Poland and the kids in the Philippines and the kids in Boa Vista, Brazil, to do piecework and sit in a closet because their smart toilet says they're not allowed to go outside because their biosensor went Ari, and so they're stuck in a closet doing a haptic robotic program. That isn't the way it's meant to be. And I can't even imagine that they can actually accomplish this, but what they've done over the past year plus is still astounding to me that they have gotten away with so much.
So, is there still time to opt out? We know there's massive amounts of data capture. I mean, we've
Right.
seen it with Facebook, Google interfaces, and like you're saying, our kids being on the Google Classroom. Wow, they've captured a ton of analytics about how kids think, and
Right.
what they're talking about and what they say and how they answer questions and how they respond in these virtual environments. And so, is there still time to opt out or to stand up, or is the data already there?
Well, it's sort of like they create the problem to sell you the solution, right? So they'll say, look at all, do you want Facebook to own your data? Do you want Google to? They're terrible. Why don't you own your data? You can own your data by being a blockchain commodity, right? And then all the data that accrues to you from pre-birth, because they're tracking even prenatal care. So there's a huge, in terms of the reproduction control, this is being piloted in the global south. The first baby was born on blockchain in Tanzania in 2018. So the mother was given an ID number, the unborn child was given an ID number, the healthcare provider, and the mother was tracked for her compliance to the prenatal program.
And do we
Now,
know
again,
if we're getting an ID number? We would know this, right? If we were given
well,
an
I
ID
mean, the
number?
question is like, I don't know that people would know, because so in Chula Vista, California, which is a suburb of San Diego, the children were having blockchain health records created on them for in-person access to in-person face-to-face education, COVID testing. That Kahala Biosciences was using this Adonaya platform, which was a blockchain electronic health record platform with those children. Now, did the parents who were told that they had to do this testing to get their kids access to in-person school, were they told the full-on ramifications of a blockchain identity? I doubt they were. Did the woman who was getting prenatal care in the hospital in Tanzania know what a digital identity meant? They probably don't. On Wednesday, I'm actually doing a podcast with my friend on Cardano, the blockchain, the cryptocurrency platform is putting 5 million Ethiopian children, students, and teachers on blockchain in Ethiopia. It's the largest pilot of blockchain, and it's for education, right? But what I'm trying to say is, before COVID, my framing was that what was coming would come through the education. They would say, here's your learning transcript. If you want to do early college, dual enrollment with the community college, we're going to give you a blockchain transcript. And that was coming out of MIT. That's a tiny smidge of the people in the world, the kids who are in high school right now. They needed the whole world, and they needed it including pre-pregnancy behavior. So if you frame it as a global health crisis, and you can force people under threat of being a national security threat to get the blockchain, that's everybody. Then you've just captured everybody in one go. But that doesn't mean that the education blockchain pilots have stopped. They will just meld. So, oh, here's your medical one. Well, we'll just harmonize it with your education one and your food stamps and your housing voucher. And they'll just harmonize them together because they're developing common data standards. This is the World Wide Web Consortium has been at this. So I think what we have to do is say we will not be blockchained. One, we have to educate people, and it's very challenging because in this moment that is crypto is seen as such a gold rush opportunity, right? People are being told that crypto blockchain is liberation. It is the opposite. And they're rushing into that without understanding smart contracts, the spatial web, smart cities, the panopticon. They're going to be ambushed, right? Because they'll be like, oh, I thought blockchain was my liberation answer. It's not. And I'm like, no, it's not.
So how would you know if you're participating in blockchain?
Well, that's a good question. I
Is
don't know.
is
I
it
would necessarily know.
Is it a credit card I open? Is it signing up for the vaccine passport program?
Well, see,
Is it?
I think the passport systems will be the entry point. What they most want is to connect your biometrics to it, because it doesn't have to be it doesn't even have to be really highly developed. So in Austin, several years ago, Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation teamed up to put do a pilot project with homeless, unhoused people in Austin and put them on blockchain. And they said it was for their medical records. What these people got was a laminated card with a QR code that represented their identity.
So it's an identity thing. So when someone tries to capture our identity in a centralized location to house data on our personal information. So, okay. So this is becoming
and
a little
linking your biometrics, like a facial scan. I believe that the Cardano platform, it's called Prism, not prison. Could be prison.
That would be obvious. That'd be obvious enough for us.
I mean, they are actually connecting it in Tanzania and I believe Kenya through the telecommunications contracts. So it was your cell phone contract that there they were expanding the cell phone access with, it was like a mesh network because they don't have the same level of infrastructure. So it was like a new sort of innovative network to get further reach of telecommunication access into more remote rural areas. And at that point, you would sign up on your contract and you would get, I'd put a digital identity and it would just say, here, smile for your selfie. And they would capture your facial recognition information.
And so the Clear ID at the airport, you know, when you're in the airport these days, you see Clear ID, they can scan your eyes and you can bypass the security.
Exactly. And then, I mean, even Idemia, which is part of the airport insurance access, like and I know in the airports I've flown in recently, all of the kiosks are changed to Idemia, and they're based in France, but they're connected again with digital twinning companies. So part of it is, I feel like it's education because people don't even know what they don't know, and or they understand half the story, and sometimes understanding only half the story, like with blockchain, is more dangerous than actually like knowing nothing because you're operating not on a complete picture. Is that there's an energetic and spiritual component to some of this too. Like if you just, other than the fact that perhaps these people have totally overreached, played their hands, that they're bluffing, that they don't have the capacity to implement all the things that they're talking about implementing. Like maybe they don't have the power to actually run all these blockchain, you know, because it's incredibly energy hogging. Maybe the satellites won't really work. Like a lot of it's kind of crappy. Excelsior Pass is sort of crappy, but I think some of that, there may be crappy pilots to say, oh, we need a national identity system, right? Oh, Excelsior Pass doesn't work in Florida. Well, then I need my own, we need a national system. But that there's stuff happening beyond the material world. I don't know. And then maybe that sounds a little corny, but I don't think it's supposed to end like this. I don't think that it's supposed to end with the bees on blockchain and us on blockchain and, you know, tracking the food spores on blockchain. Like, I don't think that that's how it is, but those of us who recognize it have to refuse it and say no. And I think for me, my principled position is refusing it, understanding our struggle for freedom is bound up in long-standing systems of domination, particularly in the United States, that are connected in with both the histories of enslavement and histories of dispossession of indigenous people. So there's this larger reckoning as we struggle for what we want for the future of our children and the unborn and the other beings, is that there's this legacy that is not yet dealt with. And not to say that we need to deal with it in a very superficial way, but from a spiritual way. Like we actually have to put the pieces together and know we got here. There's a through line of how we got here. And it was that some people are more disposable than other people. And now in the robot world, in the transhumanism world, almost all of us are disposable except for the Michael Bloombergs and Bill Gates and Piero Meteors and their data analysts and their robots. And so knowing that,
when you say they, that's who you're talking about then.
I would say, when I say they, I would say, look at the Impact Management Project. Just go online. All of this is connected to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which sound great until you understand that they're really being run through the panopticon. It's about imprisoning life on the planet to develop data to run these sensor networks and these impact finance deals. It's 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders. And so, like, even a lot of us are indirectly connected. If you have a pension fund, like they're going to be invested in human capital bonds that are putting people on wellness pathways and making them walk their step counts and do mental hygiene training. And so we all have to say, like, no, we're not doing this. It's so much more complicated than simply, is this company doing good environmental practice or not using slave labor? It's going to be way more complicated. And much of it is wrapped in very progressive, lovely sounding language.
Wow. And so, wow, that's a lot. I mean, we could re-listen and chew on this for hours and hours and days and probably not still fully understand everything that could come of systems such as these health passport type programs and what it opens the door to. And I think
digital identity. Yeah.
the digital identity, that's right. I mean, that is the encapsulation of it all, is digital identity robs us of freedom, allows domination. And so the only decision we really have to make is, do we want to sign up for complete domination, for twinning, for things beyond our control? Signing up for things, enlisting ourselves and our future generations in things that are far outside of our control, or freedom is on the other side of that. And I think that freedom has become a word that sounds cheap or sounds selfish, but when you compare it to what the alternate reality could be, it reminds us that it's worth fighting for. And so thank you so much for making that crystal clear. And I want to
I would say being a good relative. For me, that's where it is, that because I think in some ways it is our interconnectedness that is really both autonomy and interconnectedness and mutual obligation that we have. Do we want to allow this beautiful planet to be transformed into a computer? Or do we want to fight for something that is a more sacred view? And whatever your faith practice is, whatever, like, are we something that can be reduced to a computer or not? And
That's
knowing
so
that
good.
the people who are running the computers are people who are really predators. It's a predator system that's militarized and running on debt and transhumanism, right? And so we are powerful. We are incredibly powerful in all of this. We should not underestimate that, especially if we come from a place of love. And it's hard in this place of fear and anger to get there. But I think coming from a place of love and connection is really going to be key. That's
great. The interconnectedness and valuing that and the sacred relationships, like your parent-child relationships, is where we stand, especially with Stand for Health Freedom. We hold that as a sacred relationship, specifically the parent-child relationship, the relationship between you and your God. We hold that sacred. The relationships between you and your own body, we hold that sacred here at Stand for Health Freedom. And so that interconnectedness is extremely important as we step forward. And like Alison said, do we want to be reduced to a computer? Do we want our existence and our planet to be reduced to something that is a computer system? So please take heart and know that when you hear these types of things, like Alison said, we are powerful. There are things that we can do. We are a growing voting block of over 250,000 at this point with Stand for Health Freedom. And you can join, and you can also take action if you've already joined that growing voting block. So you can say no to these digital identities and to the vaccine passport type programs. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and be sure to share this with your friends.